Hamilton, and I'm the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion and Community Experience at AppNexus. I'm joined today with Nadya Powell, who's the co-founder of Utopia, and we have the great honor to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, diversity and inclusion. Today we've been talking about the marketplace. We're going to switch gears and talk about the workplace, because ultimately our teams are driving the work that impacts the marketplace. So we're going to jump right in. Nadya, why don't you tell me, how did you get into this space? We'll start there.
Well, first of all, I should say I'm feeling very insecure. I don't feel I have enough acronyms for this conversation. So I'm not an expert in the sort of the deep art of media buying. So I'm sitting here thinking, right, I need more acronyms. I feel like I can't compete.
Well, D&I.
D&I, I'm going to use BAME, but I still feel like I need a few more. So my name's Nadya Powell, and I have a culture change business called Utopia, and we specialise in creativity, innovation, and also diversity and inclusion. I've been in the diversity and inclusion space for about 5 years, starting off by looking at millennial mentoring. So how can young people from different backgrounds mentor CEOs and get them to understand what the real world's like? And then I moved into the Great British Diversity Experiment, which I think some of the people in this room actually funded. Thank you very much. Which looked at the impact diversity and inclusion has on creativity. Then I did Christmas, Easter and Summer So White, which looked at the lack of diverse imagery. When you go into a Google search and you put Christmas snowball fight, you will only see images of white people. And now I spend a lot of time working with large businesses on how they can improve their diversity and inclusion strategy across the business. So yes, it is an area that's close to my heart.
Awesome. So we're going to dive right in, because we have about 20 minutes on this topic. So we're going to go for the hard question. The original D&I lens focused primarily on gender and came out of the HR department as a CSR initiative. How has diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity, evolved over the last 5 years?
It's been so interesting watching the changes, and it doesn't stop changing. And one of the things I'd say is, if you ever feel slightly insecure, or like you have a lack of knowledge when it comes to inclusion and diversity, don't worry. I go on training all the time because it moves so fast. So yeah, right in the beginning, I think Sheryl Sandberg's book, the Lean In, really helped to crystallise some of the gender challenges we were having. And I remember when I was growing up in my 20s, which I may no longer be in, I used to think, well, there's no problem with gender. I mean, look around me. There's all these women in the business I'm working in. I was at a digital agency called Dare at the time. And it was only when I came back from my first maternity leave and went to a lot of events and realised I was often the only female in the room that I started to think there's a challenge here. So the debate started off very much with gender. As I said, Sheryl crystallised it. And in some ways it was good it started there. Women aren't a minority. We are actually a very marginal majority. And there's a lot of evidence to show that if you tackle gender, other areas of diversity and inclusion do follow naturally, because you start the debate there. However, as time went on, we started to realise, okay, there are more women moving up in the industry, and the media industry is actually more friendly to women than the creative industry, which I think is wonderful. So people started to look at ethnicity and LGBT, and realising that there were real challenges with ethnicity, and those challenges are still there, and so something that a lot of organisations are still very actively focused on. And then the conversation started to really branch out to look at disability. Once you get over 60, 40% of us will be disabled in some way. So the lack of focus on disability is really quite challenging for all of us. We won't be able to read what it says the ingredients are on a Heinz baked beans can when we're over 60. How will we know if it's got sugar or not? And then increasingly there's conversations, and this has very much developed in the past 6 to 12 months, around neurodiversity. And neurodiversity is such an interesting topic. So neurodiversity means autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. So it's for people who have, as they would say within the community, a superpower. So they are different, and they're able to do certain things much more quickly or differently, or have a different perspective on things. And historically, people have hidden if they are neurodiverse, and the opposite to neurodiverse is neurotypical, not neuronormal. So it's really nice to see that those conversations are coming out now. And then more recently, mental health and well-being. So we know that within this industry, there are huge challenges around mental health. A lot of people are going through mental health challenges and just keep quiet about it. Their line managers may not be aware of it, which just makes the situation much, much worse. So we're seeing the conversation moving from very much a focus on ladies to being a focus on actually how can everybody be their authentic selves? How can everybody feel welcome and comfortable in work?
Great. And as we think about that ecosystem and how everybody feels comfortable, how do we build, manage, and sustain an inclusive work environment?
I'm really glad you mentioned the word inclusion. It's almost like we discussed this before. Inclusion, I think, is the really key word. So you've probably experienced this yourself. Very much the focus used to be on diversity. This has two challenges. One, as soon as you mention the word diversity, the white men tend to do this.
I didn't see that.
Or they do this. If they're bad people. Because diversity, immediately, white men think that doesn't involve them because they are the majority and often in the situations of power. And I've been in so many sessions with very senior leaders in organisations where I mention the word diversity and I can literally just see the light go off in all the white men's eyes. If you talk about inclusion, it's a totally different reaction because inclusion means you can be a parent. So if you are a man and you have children and you want to maybe leave early on a Friday so you can pick them up from school once a day, that inclusion is for you. Or if you suffer from depression or you are dyslexic, inclusion means you. So the word inclusion doesn't exclude anybody, and whereas the word diversity, for whatever reason, seems to exclude men. So inclusion is starting to become the word that we tend to lead on. The other reason why inclusion is so important is if you don't have an inclusive culture, it doesn't matter how diverse you are. So you have to have an inclusive culture in order to let every single voice be heard. So I've seen a lot of examples where an organisation will put in a scheme from the right place, from a good place in their heart, and they maybe will hire some young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and they'll bring them into their organisation, and then they'll put them in the same meetings as maybe their Oxbridge grads. And they will expect them to perform in the same way as their Oxbridge grads. It's just not going to happen. They haven't had hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on their education. In an inclusive company, then the difference of these young people will be recognised and supported and nurtured, and then they will stay. It's the same if someone is ADHD or dyslexic, or if someone comes from a different culture or a different religion. Inclusion is for everybody, and that's why we now talk about inclusion and diversity, not diversity inclusion, because you cannot have a diverse business if it does not have an inclusive culture. So that's very much the focus that we're leading with now.
Great. And I'll ask the question that maybe some people are thinking, when you're talking about including everyone, does that mean that someone is left behind?
I think it's quite, and we talked about this yesterday, didn't we? And I was like, I never thought of it like that. I think some people worry that as the world gets more and more complex, though there are more and more people to think about, that means that other people are thought about less. That's the total opposite of what should be the case. Right. Inclusion is for everyone. So I'll give you an example. I'm working with a factory at the moment in Sidcup of a well-known drinks manufacturer. And that is a business which is 92% male and 95% white. And we had an absolutely wonderful conversation with a team of men, factory workers there. And one of the blokes put his hand up, and he is definitely someone you would see would have, majority control if you were to use the old-fashioned language. And he said 4 years ago, I was offered a promotion, and I turned it down because I'd just become a new dad, and I didn't feel that I could take that commitment on with being a parent, which is a really brave choice to make. And he told them that's why he decided not to go for the interview, because he felt he needed to be around more for his children. He was then offered the promotion again 2 years later, and flexible working. And so he took the promotion. Now, his story is amazing. All the team around him, just immediately, you could tell that their passion and commitment to that employee was brilliant. And he is a white man, but he immediately feels so much more included. So I think it shows the power of the debate. Nobody's excluded if everyone is included. Okay. Now, I should say, it doesn't mean you don't focus on those minorities who have traditionally been excluded. That is also really important, and you've got to put in special measures to do that, but you keep the conversation about everyone. Favourite quote we use is, no minority has ever changed the course of history without the support of the majority. And that's essentially, I think, what people are now understanding. You've got to have the CEO on board, who is statistically likely to be a white man, and the way to make sure he's on board is to make sure this is about empowering everybody in the room.
Great. And you mentioned something when you were talking about measures, because measures are important, right? We all make business decisions based on data. So what's the ROI on diversity and inclusion?
2.5. No, I don't actually have a number. But if I had one of these tools, I might do. So I think everybody who's familiar with the McKinsey study around the diversity and inclusion. So first of all, I would just read that. McKinsey did a study 3 years ago which showed that A gender-balanced business outperforms 15%, and a ethnically balanced business outperforms 35%. So that just gives you the bottom line commercial thing, and it's a very robust piece of data. What McKinsey didn't sort of uncover or go into is why. Why would it have this huge impact on the bottom line? And these two quotes, I think, sum it up really, really well, which is that the most important thing about diversity is you have a diverse set of opinions, a diverse set of experiences, a diverse set of cultures. Now, I think especially in Britain, we don't like conflict, and we like it when we all agree. So we've probably all been in a situation when there's been a problem and we've tried to solve it. And very quickly, we all come to the same solution. We think, wow, we're brilliant. That must be the best solution. That's called cultural consensus. We all come from the same background, same perspective, and we're just all agreeing with each other. You know when you're getting to a brilliant solution when there's conflict and people are going, no, but I think this, or I think this, or I had an experience of this, or what about this? And a perfect example of that is when I did the Great British Diversity Experiment, we set a brief, Tesco set a brief, which was, how do we solve the problem of food wastage? Now, I come from the UK, and my immediate reaction was, what problem with food wastage? Is there a problem with food wastage? I mean, I eat my food, some of it I don't eat, I throw away some of it. The team who actually won that experiment, and it was judged by people like Cindy Gallop and Jonathan Mildenhall, so a very high standard, were 10 people, and luckily, the experiment worked. They were the most diverse team. And the reason why it worked was because there's one woman in the team who came from South Africa, and she had seen real poverty, and she understood what food mountains and food wastage was doing in the world. And another gentleman had grown up within the Soviet bloc in the olden days when they had food rationing. So they had a totally different perspective on food wastage. And so the solutions they came up with are incredible. Now, they argued for ages about what was the right idea. And again, the Brits were all like, oh my God, we're all arguing. That must mean we're rubbish. No, conflict over idea generation is brilliant. It is a sign that things are going well, and you're going to come up with something unique. And in the end, what they did was they wrote up the 5 ideas that were at the top, and they scored them according to the metrics. And that is an example of an idea winning by merit, not because of the majority voice in the room, or not because a boss is saying this is the right way to go. It's been evaluated really, really carefully. So I think what that shows, and what these two quotes are trying to pull out, is that the real business advantage of diversity is that you will be more creative and more innovative, and you will come up with more unique ideas, thoughts, solutions. And I think this top quote, what I really like about here, is combining option A and option B, even if they want to see mutually exclusive. And that's this reference to the fact that conflict, I'm not talking about people screaming at each other and calling each other names, healthy conflict, positive conflict, polite conflict, is really, really important. And I think what's interesting is if you look at engineering and R&D texts, the demand for diversity has been there for 20, 30, 40 years. It's a well-known established fact that the more diverse the people, and we talked about this, didn't we, because that was your experience at L'Oreal, is that the R&D team were the most diverse because it's seen as absolutely critical to idea generation. And in a world where everything's changing, we're in constant disruption, then the winners are the people who will have the best ideas and build the best solutions. So diversity and inclusion really, really is critical to that.
Absolutely.
So I don't have 2.6 as a number, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an input into what I think the strengths and benefits are.
Right. So diversity is the mix, and inclusion is making the mix work. Many people say that. But really, what does it mean to be an inclusive leader, as we talk to our executives here today? Mm-hmm.
Inclusive leader is a really interesting one because if you want to build an inclusive culture, who here wants an inclusive culture? Everyone put your hands up. It's bad to say no. Okay, good. Good. It'd be a bit sad if you didn't want to. It has to come from the leader, and there's still to this day very little study, research, or writing on what and who is an inclusive leader. Deloitte did a study about 2 years ago, and when you read through their description of what an inclusive leader is, it's basically a good leader. I mean, you read it and just go, if they weren't that, they'd just be a bad leader. So I think understanding what inclusivity means is critical. And when you look at all the text and the writing on it, it's all about people having a sense of belonging. So they feel like they belong. And that's something which, especially when you look at the millennial generation, which are now really old, they're 35 at the top end. So let's go below Gen Z age. So when you look at the younger generation, then belonging is absolutely critical to them in the workplace. So when you're thinking about how can we create an inclusive culture, it's a culture where anyone at any one point feels like they belong and they can be 100% themselves. So as a leader, your role is to listen to people, to give them a sense that they are valued no matter what they have to say, but also to have an understanding of their culture or their personal experience as well. I think a really good example of how you can start to create an inclusive culture is a client that we're working with. We talked to her about National Autism Week, which happened a little while ago. And so she emailed the whole company saying, it's National Autism this week, so we're going to have a lunchtime session around autism. And on the back of that, she had 2 members of staff saying, I'm actually on the autistic spectrum. I've never told anyone at work because I felt really embarrassed, but I'm really happy to see that you're supporting it, and I'd love to come to the event and I can potentially talk. And a whole bunch of parents saying, my child is autistic. And sometimes it's a real struggle at work because I have really difficult mornings. And I'm really happy that you're opening up this conversation. So just the fact they said we're going to think about National Autism Week created this whole conversation. I have one other client who just recently, and this came out of a hack we did with them around ideas, they've gone out to the whole business, and it's a large business, and said, if you don't celebrate Easter, but you celebrate other religious holidays, you can transfer your Good Friday and your Bank Holiday Monday to those religious holidays. Now, that's incredible. The reaction to that was absolutely huge. They did it. They literally, and like I said, they are a sizable business. They decided to do it, and they implemented it within a week. Now, they did get a couple of people going, well, I do sort of celebrate Easter, but could I just take those holidays and put them onto my holiday and take an extra long holiday? No, that's not the point. That's really not the point. But you obviously had people who celebrate different cultural holidays saying, brilliant, I'll come into work on Good Friday and Bank Holiday Monday, and then I'd like to take them for X, X, and X instead. And again, it just showed to that whole business that it doesn't matter who you are, you belong, and you are welcome, and we really value and respect you.
Sure. And usually these measures don't cost a whole lot of money to implement.
Well, that one costs nothing. I mean, the office, they have security all the time, so people could just come in on the Friday and the Monday, so they just had to add 2 holiday days to those people who put their hands up and flagged that they wanted to celebrate different religious holidays. Right. So really, really easy.
Win-win. So as people leave this afternoon, what are 3 things that they can take away and do to impact diversity and inclusion in their organization?
The most important one is to build a strategy, and to build a strategy right at the top, embedded in your business plan. So all too often still I see inclusion and diversity seen as CSR or as a special project, which typically a young, usually female, is given and told that it's a brilliant responsibility, but by the way, she has no budget, no say, and there's no one on the board who will ever listen to her. So first of all, it needs to be a key pillar of the business plan, and it needs to be embedded into the business as a strategic initiative. Second of all, it needs budget. And budget doesn't mean paying someone like me to come in and help build your strategy. It's other things, like, as I mentioned, if you are hiring people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, you will need to invest in more training for them. You can't expect them to be able to perform to the same level as your graduates because they haven't had that investment in their education in the past. You will need to put it in. Or you might have to appoint different sources for your recruitment, as an example, and go outside your existing supply chain. So the budget has a broad set of things. And most importantly, data. I think data is so vital. It's vital in 2 ways. First of all, you need to know how diverse your organisation is and where the challenges might be. You might have a thriving LGBTQ community and you might not know about it, but on ethnicity, then you could be really under-indexing the country. So you really need to understand your diversity data, but also your inclusion data. So do people feel like they can be themselves? Do people feel like they can come to work and let their line manager know if they're starting to feel depressed? And what's really good about inclusion data, diversity data takes a long time to change. Right. And it can be a little bit disheartening if you're trying to see change. Like if you've got a management team and it's 80% male and you want to make it 60% male, you can't just sack half your, unless they're rubbish, but generally you can't sack half your management team. It's going to take time to change that stat. Whereas inclusion data, because you can do things like look at your parental leave policies, look at your holiday policies, start raising awareness around whether the LGBT community, or if you've got a transgender community or a community of neurodiverse, suddenly you can really change your inclusion stats, and you'll see things like people saying, this is a place I want to stay, this is a place I believe in, this is a place that I belong in, moving much more quickly. And I'm really pleased that the Diversity Task Force, which I'm sure some of the organisations in here are a member of, they've just commissioned a survey for, and who knows about the Diversity Task Force and the survey that's gone out or might have filled it in? I know that people like MediaCom and people like that have done it. Okay, I'll just tell you what it is. So it's a huge survey which has gone out to media and creative agencies in the industry, asking to identify how you would describe yourself, and also things about mental health and well-being. And the findings of that survey are being announced at an event on the 8th of June. So it's called the Advertising Diversity Summit, which is maybe not the most imaginative title, but it does what it says on the tin.
Right.
So I think it's great to see that we're going to get a real sense of how diverse the industry is, but also how people are feeling from the perspective of mental health, well-being and neurodiversity. So data is absolutely key.
Great. And I think that's a great place to leave the conversation. Thank you, Nadya, and thank you all for listening.